All right, everybody. Welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. It's me, Amy. I'm doing the intro, and maybe it's really because we have a guest. That's whenever we have a guest, I do an intro. And I'm so excited about this guest. Her name is Kelly Jewell. She's a registered dietitian, skilled in providing nutrition therapy for individuals struggling with disordered eating. Kelly earned her master's degree from Eastern Kentucky University with an emphasis in maternal nutrition. Kelly began her career working with local schools and businesses to make varied food options available in the community. Following her community work, Kelly developed a specialty in the treatment of individuals with eating disorders through work at a renowned eating disorder program, as well as outpatient practice. She continues to treat eating-related concerns and educates and empowers clients and families to create flexible, sustainable, and health-promoting nutrition goals. So, I'm so excited to have Kelly on because we finally get someone with more expertise on disordered eating, which I feel like we've covered in a lot of bits and pieces, but we haven't necessarily had a full-blown episode on it. So I'm so happy you're here, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm happy to be here and excited to chat.
Yeah, I think probably a really good place to start would be just explaining what is disordered eating and maybe differentiating between a true eating disorder and disordered eating and the spectrum of what that looks like and maybe signs to look for.
Yeah. I like to use spectrum because I always explain to clients and families that disordered eating is a spectrum that we are all on, right? That we all engage in some disordered eating habits at times. And some of those are really normalized. Some of those are normalized and they shouldn't be, right? And then at a certain point on the spectrum, behaviors get so frequent and so intense that they're compromising both mentally, emotionally, and physically to a degree where we would say, okay, now this has become a diagnosable eating disorder. I think that is, it's sometimes really important to clients to have that label because I think eating disorders can really thrive in secrecy. And so when we can put a name to it, that can really help validate, get us a little traction to move us forward. But it is important to know, even if you don't have a diagnosable eating disorder, if you have some disordered eating behaviors or mentalities, that can still be really worth addressing and challenging and trying to move forward. I think an eating disorder or disordered eating behaviors, we think about the combination of what's going on physically, what's going on behaviorally, and then what's going on mentally and emotionally. Sometimes I use restriction as an example. So when we think of restriction, sometimes we think of just caloric restriction. I'm limiting myself to this many calories. Sometimes restriction can be, I'm sure in the work that you guys do with clients, restriction can be the type of thing that I can eat. So if someone it can be medically mandated. It can be a food allergy is the reason I'm restricting. It can be, and then it can go, on the spectrum to have a fear food. And so I'm restricting this food, because of my fear around it, that it's not healthy enough, etc. And then I think restriction can also be a mentality, right? So if you, really wanted a chicken Caesar wrap for lunch, right? That's what sounded really good. But you decided, you're at the restaurant, the calories are on the menu. You're just deciding that's not healthy enough for me. So I'm going to go with the salad instead of the wrap instead. That could also be restriction, even if both is meeting your nutrition needs. And so, I think that helps give an example of all of the, mental, emotional, and physical ways that someone can be affected by disordered eating. And that gets, again, in your work with clients, that gets even more muddy when there is a medical diagnosis that we're having to integrate and work around.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, in our patient population, they're a lot of times the initial approach is, change your diet. You have IBS symptoms. And maybe they're going to conventional GI, maybe they're going to more of an integrative doctor. We sort of see, I think, a lot of people from the integrative space, both Nikki and I have come sort of from like the holistic lens, but we've like definitely gone way more in the middle. We feel like we're like kind of in no man's land because we don't necessarily we go more in the weeds than maybe the conventional GI people go into, but then there's kind of the Wild West in the holistic space with some of like the dietary restrictions and things like that. But with the typical person that gets diagnosed with IBS or functional GI disorders, they're often told like, hey, here's this list of yes and no foods. And a lot of times it's FODMAP. There can be different variations of it, but it's usually the FODMAP diet. And in the research, the FODMAP diet has a lot of positives behind it. It does seem to help symptoms. But in practice, what happens is that most of people are doing this on their own without a dietitian, which is not how it's typically used in the research setting. And like, I rarely see someone going on low FODMAP and not developing some degree of disordered eating. The diet's meant to be temporary. A lot of people stay on it because then they're scared. Like, ooh, this food's red and this food's green. Like, it just creates like this danger mindset around food. So yeah, I think it's really tricky when like a lot of times the intervention that's like supposed to be helpful, and maybe it could. I think it's a tool that can certainly help some people, but there has to be guidance on like how to use it appropriately and how to get off of it, because it is like a temporary tool to sort of subdue symptoms. I don't know if you've generally ever seen that like IBS related or like even just health concerns driving dietary changes. Because it's tricky, like you said, it's so muddy where like, ooh, an initial intervention may be helpful, but then it can very easily spiral into food fears and then nutrition gaps and things like that.
Well, and if I could interrupt before we let Kelly talk on this point, is that oftentimes, like I said, when people do this diet on their own from the wisdom of the internet, or if they work with a so-called functional, integrative, or naturopathic practitioner, like basically anybody other than a Monash-trained dietitian, right? For all intents and purposes, then you start getting into like this confusion about what the mechanism is. And instead of, hey, this is a tool that we're going to use to the degree necessary to manage your symptoms, and our goal is to have the most expansive, permissive version of this diet while still helping you feel better. So maybe you just cut out onion, garlic, wheat, beans, and cabbage. And maybe that's good enough for you, right? And that could manage your symptoms really well. Instead of that sort of a conversation, we get into this conversation of, you need to starve the SIBO. And if you eat even one molecule of a high FODMAP food, then you're feeding the SIBO and you're going to lose the battle. And this is all your fault. You gave yourself SIBO. And like I think that that's a big part of it, is people not understanding what a diet like low FODMAP actually does and like where the research is. But I think that gets tangled up with this food fear. Like they get freaked out that they're going to feed the SIBO and it's all their fault. They're going to give themselves SIBO again. It's their fault that it's relapsed. And their doctor or their naturopath is putting a lot of pressure on them to be compliant with this diet, even though it totally blows. And so that's a piece of it, I think, too, is a lack of supervision, but also in some settings, the supervision that you are receiving is wrong. Like their way of explaining the diet, their way of monitoring the diet is just wrong. And then that causes more disordered eating too.
Yeah, totally. And I think there is, in the clinical space, there's not always enough conversation and education around what does the research say about what a restrictive mentality like can look like and what to anticipate as possibly happening as you start to make these changes. You know, I talk a lot with clients about a scarcity mentality, right? If I tell you, don't think of a pink elephant, what do? You automatically are like, well, now I'm thinking of a pink elephant, right? And so when we say you're not going to have wheat and garlic and right, like we name these things that are understandably that we're trying to explore if not having them can be helpful for some period of time. when we say, I'm not going to have this thing, that thing is sort of like now a blinking light and beacon, and can dominate our mental space, and then just highlight, I think, for us when something is available or not available, that we don't have as much options. And I think it reinforces rigidity. I think reinforces rigidity. And so it's not to say that we don't want to pursue trying those things to see if a low FODMAP diet could be helpful for a period of time. But it is saying, hey, I want you to know, as we're trying this, what you could possibly experience is an increase in rigid thoughts and behaviors and worries about what's going to happen to you physically, what you're going to experience physically. And that is going to have an impact on your physical experience, right? Our food, lots of different foods can have lots of different impacts on our digestive experience. And also, our stress about how those foods are going to have an impact on our digestive experience is just as impactful sometimes as those foods. And so knowing that there's not like a perfect rhythm for managing that, but knowing that ahead of time, I think can help clients ground themselves a little bit more to say like, okay, why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling today? Is it because there was contamination in the food that I ate? Was it because I, could have tried a different option? Was it because I was so anxious going into this meal when I'm like at an amusement park with my friends that I'm going to be like farting and uncomfortable and have diarrhea for the next 3 hours now I'm somaticizing these really uncomfortable things, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. Like the term that I like for that like blinking light is it's like you're almost magnifying the experience of like, ooh, I'm going into this meal and oh my gosh, there might be garlic in this meal. Like I better be hyper vigilant to how I respond after this meal. And like, I'm just going to like be fearful while I'm eating the food and after. And I think you're right. Like that aspect is so interesting to me. And I don't think we can there isn't a clear way to study this, like basically in a lot of the research. And I hopefully in some of the Monash studies and the studies where they've done this, I think the dietitian probably is good at explaining like how this diet even works. Like Nikki was saying, like how like this is a temporary thing. Like even having that in your mind, like some people think that they're on this for life. So I think that the magnification is definitely really interesting. There was a study recently, and I always wonder if this would be similar with FODMAPs. It was a study on gluten. So there was researchers that they were basically trying to see like how expectation affects outcome. So they would have people, they would prepare like toast for people basically and be like, here's toast. It has gluten or it doesn't have gluten, but they would lie sometimes. So sometimes the food would have gluten, but they say it's gluten-free. And sometimes the gluten-free option had gluten. And basically what they found is that the people that were told they were eating gluten, even though it was gluten-free, had stronger reactions than when they were actually getting the gluten. It's such an interesting, like, weird mind game. Then it shows, like, again, how thoughts and feelings around the food really affect biology and, like, how your body is truly reacting to those things. And I always wonder, like, it'd be so interesting to do that with FODMAPs, too. I'd imagine there'd be at least somewhat of a phenomenon like that. Maybe it's not quite as extreme. I couldn't say for sure. But usually working with people generally can tolerate more than they believe. And so like the changing sort of like thoughts and beliefs around food, I think can be really important in terms of moving forward. Yeah. But yeah, I think in terms of like, I also think with like the wellness side of things, you kind of mentioned it in the intro or like in the earlier part of this discussion. I think the wellness space, and Nikki alluded to it too, like creates a very perfectionistic like mindset around, like it is rigid when you're talking about rigidity. And I think that's really important to recognize if you are sort of intertwined with wellness industry at all? Because a lot of wellness providers, like the naturopaths that Nikki was saying, or functional medicine providers, they have disordered eating too. So it's like it creates this weird situation where, like you were saying, some of these practices are viewed as acceptable or even like that you should be doing these things, even though they feel kind of disordered. I was reading your bio on the website, and I think there was something where you had like, I believe, and one thing that stood out was like, I believe that you should eat when you're hungry and sometimes when you're not. I feel like, to me, that's like something very much in the wellness space where they're like, oh, you should never eat when you're not hungry. And it's like, whoa, this is like a crazy rule. Right. So could you talk a little bit more about that, sort of like some of the messaging that you see out in the real world, like whether it's kind of diet culture type messaging or wellness messaging that, you know, it's like, oh, these practices could very easily slip into like disordered eating territory.
Yeah. And I think it's what's so hard too with clients who have IBS and are looking to help manage the symptoms is it's really easy to like validate why we're doing certain things because the symptoms are extremely uncomfortable. And so it's really easy to it's hard, I think, sometimes when you're doing some self-examination to try and determine like, what is my real motivation? It takes a lot of curiosity, I think, to figure out why we're doing certain behaviors. And oftentimes it's the combination of concern for our physical health and our like experience of symptoms. And also there's this like little whispering voice, whether it's diet culture or our mom or the patriarchy or whoever, right, saying, here's the actual reason you should be doing those things. I think the thing I commonly see from folks right now is stress if they're losing social connection over food with people because the food option that they want isn't going to be available, and how we go about trying to maintain social connectedness with food while also trying to honor whatever nutrition plan we have going on currently. And I ask for someone if you're finding that it's a repeat experience that you're having to adjust a plan or turn down a plan because you can't find something to accommodate you, to really be curious, like, is this actually not something I'm able to like accommodate with the options that are available to me? Can I figure out with the people I'm working with how I go out to dinner or how I go to a friend's house to eat? I think that's the one go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say, can I play a little bit of devil's advocate just for fun? However, just for funsies. So I love that you brought up this point about like, are you losing social connections as a consequence of your strict eating? And can you be curious about that and try to find ways that you're still able to maintain your relationships and your connections and your social life? And that's really important, I think, especially for IBS, because there's such a tie-in with vagal tone and gut function. And like, if your vagal tone is shot because you've isolated yourself and you're not meeting with friends and you're not meeting with family anymore, like that's going to affect your tolerance for food, ironically enough. And it's a downward kind of spiral. But I'll throw this out there. Sometimes a healing journey can teach you that you need to change elements of your life. And sometimes it's parts of your life that you really don't want to change, like relationships and hobbies and habits. So I'm picturing, again, like to go to a total extreme, if you are an alcoholic and you become aware that you have a problem with alcohol, but all of your friends are like raging drinker, alcoholic type people, right? Like if your idea of fun and social connection is going to the bar and getting blackout, shit-faced drunk, then the strict no alcohol diet that you're on and trying to sober up might actually be, it might be good that you're severing those ties with those people and those relationships because that was not a healthy thing, right? So I think that there is like a little bit of nuance to it, but I think that making sure that you maintain some semblance of a social life and like connection with the world, connection with people, and like allow yourself to have some enjoyment from food is really important. But I thought I'd share that other flip side.
Yeah, totally. And I think what I'm looking for in clients is sort of like the willingness to problem solve around it. I think because, again, with eating disorders, there's so much secrecy and so much shame that we might say, okay, yeah, your friends are, all of you are in a pattern of doing something that you're noticing is not serving you. And if these are friendships that can be maintained because they're not getting shit-faced drunk every night and you're not trying to do something different there, can, instead of going out to eat at this place that you guys have always gone to, but just doesn't have a lot of options, what would it be like to suggest something different? What would it be like to host them in your home? What would it be like? And so, yeah, totally, as a clinician, wanting to maintain flexibility to say like, yeah, that makes total sense that this place is not working. And when they go there every Thursday for, what's it called when people ask questions and you like do it as a group to try and trivia?
Oh, yeah.
when you go to trivia every Thursday, right? Like, what would it be like to say, okay, that's just not going to work for me, but like, can we do this place at Saturday for brunch? Can you guys come over on Friday night and I'll make dinner? Can you? And if we're willing to problem solve and find some alternatives that still offer that connectedness and still offer us the chance to, like, again, honor whatever we're doing nutritionally, but stay connected. I think that feels important. If we determine those relationships are worth continuing.
Yes. Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about like connection on this podcast too, because it's like at the core of safety. I think like all this like disordered eating patterns a lot of times create a lot of like, ooh, that's, especially in the IBS space, oh, that food's dangerous for me. And it's like, is it? Like, even if it causes symptoms, like here's the tricky part. Even if it causes, we've had some anxiety people on too that kind of discuss the nuance with this because it's tricky too. Like even if something is very uncomfortable, even 10 out of 10 discomfort, we wouldn't want that. But at the same time, like it might not necessarily be inherently like dangerous, but I think like figuring out ways to sort of lower that threat appraisal is really important for moving forward from like a food fear standpoint. But I think the connectedness is so important because it helps create that safety, the safety signals that your body needs to stay and rest and digest. And we are social creatures. Like we need to find joy and connection, and we need to be connecting to people. And I would say in my own journey with IBS back in the day, the worst I ever was when I was so rigid about my diet. I had lost a bunch of weight, like definitely disordered eating. I don't know if it would meet clinical standards for an eating disorder, but definitely had a really, really rough go. Was not connecting, saying like, I can't eat out restaurants. I can't do this stuff. Is this a sustainable option for me? Is this making my life better? Or it seems like it's not making my life better at all. It seems like it's really hindering my life in a lot of different ways. Am I really sure that I can't eat the food or find something that works, at least for the time being? Like, I like how you're sort of, ooh, how can we ask questions or get curious about where we're at? Because like I said, most of the people that I work with can tolerate way more than they think they can, as long as they are opening up to the idea and experimenting a little bit and willing to kind of risk maybe being uncomfortable if something doesn't necessarily go as planned. And I think like a lot of times if you're willing to do that, if you're opening up and you're not, you're willing to accept maybe there's going to be some ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
That's really where I think people make a lot of progress when they can kind of push out of their comfort zone.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times in my work with clients, and sometimes this is conversations around like, do I feel ready to go out to dinner with folks? Sometimes it's about like thinking about if engaging in this type of movement is appropriate, et cetera. We're asking some of these like principle-based questions, and some examples of those are like, will this provide joy and not deplete it? Will this increase mind-body connection or induce disconnection? Will this alleviate stress or produce more? And I think going through some of those questions can be helpful in saying like, okay, you're thinking about this restaurant. It's sort of like a pros and cons list with it. Like the con is that we could be farting for the next 2 hours. The pro is that I haven't seen this friend since college, and we're like going through that, and we're saying like, what is it? Because we do that with lots of things, and it doesn't always have the intensity that it does around food. I often give the example of like, okay, well, I know I feel best when I get 8 hours of sleep. And also, if I'm really in need of connecting with a friend, maybe I stay up late to connect with a friend, even though I know I'm only going to get 6 hours. Because even though I'm feeling tired and see the con of that, also the way that it's life-giving to connect with a friend is important. And we can sort of see the like pro and con there. But so often food behaviors and our relationship to food become so rigid, we're not able to have that nuanced conversation. And it's just like, this will be the result if I do this, so I can tolerate that, And I think, like you're saying, people are able to tolerate a lot more than they're aware of, and practicing some of that distress tolerance is important work.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that a key aspect of it, too, is that I think one thing that helps patients really change their mindset is when they can see like, oh, what I am doing is actually like setting me up for more symptoms as well. Mm-hmm. Like the longer you're removing these foods, the more tolerance you're losing to them. Typically, you start developing nutrient deficiencies. A lot of my patients lose weight. And, it's one of the things that drives me absolutely insane in this space is that someone will drop like 20 pounds in like a 3-month period. And like the doctor's just like, well, that's just a part of the process. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, this is not okay. Like, this person was like at a weight that they feel good at, and then they drop 20 pounds all of a sudden, and they're undernourished, and that just exacerbates symptoms. So I think even for some people coming at it through the lens of like changing their beliefs around like what actually will help them long term, like kind of zooming out from like a very short-term symptom management standpoint to zooming out of, oh no, all these things are going to negatively affect my gut-brain axis if my body is not nourished and doesn't feel safe because it's not getting the resources it needs, if my microbiome's losing tolerance to food because I'm just not eating things. And I think that can sometimes be an important turning point for people as well, is just understanding that like disordered eating disorders have such a big effect on your overall health that's going to drive more symptoms. So like it is very important. It feels like you're solving the problem in a weird way by controlling the diet, but actually you're probably making things worse.
Yeah.
Do you feel like sometimes like discussing more of the physical aspects like gets people to turn or like change some of their behaviors more? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. We talk a lot about sort of accommodating the eating disorder and how acutely I can understand why people are feeling like they want to avoid something, that there's some function in avoiding them immediately, but that it's actually reinforcing things in the long term. And, we always talk about like, okay, the gut is a muscle, and just like any other muscle, if we are not using it and we start to use it again, there's going to be soreness, and soreness in a gut looks like an exacerbation of those symptoms. It looks like constipation, it looks like diarrhea, it looks like bloating and gaseousness, etc. And that the more nourished we can become, the actually the like less intense some of those symptoms get for folks over time. But we have to go through that like soreness period. And I do think for a group of clients that have understanding how like a metabolically underfunctioning body, an undernourished body is sort of reinforcing their physical discomfort is helpful. And then I do think that there's a group of people who, when we are experiencing malnutrition and we have some mind-body disconnection, connecting with some of that, cerebral information is hard to do, right? And we have to take a different approach because it's hard to engage with that when our brain, we've lost white matter in our brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the higher frontal lobe kind of centers the logical part of the brain versus the survival instinct lizard brain, right? And like your lizard brain is saying, avoid, this is scary, this is oh my God, this is bad, evil food. And the logical part of your brain might understand, oh yeah, like Nikki and Amy make some good points and maybe carbs aren't evil. But it's like those two parts of your brain are kind of at war with each other at times. I have a question too, and I'm starting to, as we're talking, I'm starting to think about like clients that I've worked with and students that I've had go through my program. And I wonder, here's a question. So let's say we have somebody with a history of an overt eating disorder like anorexia or bulimia. Do you think it's possible for somebody with that kind of history to healthfully, realistically maintain a very restrictive diet? So as an example, I talked with a woman who was a student in my program recently and found out that she didn't really do any of the nutritional work, but she said, I'm a vegan and I'm quote, I'm very aware of what I eat. And she also mentioned she had a history of anorexia. And to me, that combination was a red flag. To me, hearing somebody with a history of anorexia say, I'm very aware of what I eat, and that they are a vegan, sent up the red flags. And I thought, ooh, these two things don't go good together. I think this is a big part of why you're still stuck. But frankly, she was not willing to receive coaching around that idea. Do you think that there's a universe where somebody with a history of an eating disorder can successfully, healthfully maintain a strict diet like vegan or keto and basically not have it cause problems for their mental or physical health?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I haven't seen it that happen successfully in the 12 years that I've been working clinically. I think there are clients and clinicians who take a improved quality of life approach, and I don't really think of that as being like full recovery and remission from an eating disorder. Maybe they've identified things that are of value to them, and they've worked to see like, how can I still have those things be of value and be on this restrictive diet? And, that approach is the one that they're currently taking. I don't think that looks like recovery for folks. And I have seen a lot of people who have tried that for a really long time and then come back, and then we have to say like, yeah, we got 80% of the way there. And that felt a lot better than 50% of the way there. But we're now knowing that like, that's still not enough. And what do we have to do?
Yeah. Still a flavor of the same problem, essentially.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I had another question too. And it kind of came up with some of the stuff you were saying a little bit earlier. I think it's really important, that soreness period or like that transition period. I'm currently writing a book. It is kind of interesting looking at like eating disorder research and how it impacts gut symptoms. Like there's a huge connection because again, and most of I think the studies are more on like anorexia, not kind of like those flavors of eating disorder. more than maybe like we see true orthorexia, but there's similarities in the fact that a lot of people become malnourished. Like the end. But there seems to be a lot of GI symptoms in the eating disorder realm. And I think, again, because when you're depleted, it's really hard for your gut-brain connection to work optimally. But then it's interesting because the studies do show that GI symptoms improve once they move through like refeeding and fueling properly. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like some of the IBS symptoms you see when people become malnourished, and then like what happens? Like sometimes it's hard to get people to eat if they're having GI symptoms during that malnourished period, and like maybe some things you do there. Maybe answer that first, and then I can kind of get to the follow-up question to that. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think for the vast majority of people, what we're talking about when they're experiencing malnutrition, and I think you guys know this, but it feels important to identify, like malnutrition doesn't just mean underweight, right? I think some people have in their mind, like, I am only malnourished if I'm underweight, right? According to like the BMI standard, et cetera. But malnutrition can happen at like any weight. If we have been nourished, changed our nourishment, even if our weight can still look appropriate, we can still be malnourished. So I feel like that's important to identify. But so conversation usually looks like, hey, your body really wants to be stable. It's doing everything that it can to keep you safe. And so what it's going to do is it's going to decrease its metabolic efficiency in order to try and do that. And some of those things are, it takes energy to pump blood to your fingertips and then back. So you're going to have cold hands and fingers because your body's going to be like, that's not essential, right? Everything essential is right here. We're going to keep it all right here. Your fingers, I'm not worried about that. Another thing that happens with the decreased metabolic efficiency is just the way that we effectively digest decreases, right? And so when we're not digesting well, we're experiencing all of those symptoms like that we mentioned before: constipation, diarrhea, cramping, gaseousness, bloating, etc. Right? Some of that is because of the gut-brain disconnection. Some of that is because of a decrease in digestive enzymes. And so there's lots of reasons that's happening. And as we're working to increase nutrition, we expect that soreness to happen. How I work with clients to tolerate that. I mean, sometimes we're thinking about, okay, what can we do to address the gas? Some people they're like, we're going to drink this particular type of tea. Some people, we're going to do gentle seated stretching so we can work out some of the gas. Sometimes it is taking Gas-X, so it just depends. There are pros and cons to each particular approach. And then at the same time, it's working on what are our skills of distress tolerance, etc. How can we practice those? So we know we can be consistent throughout the course of this next 3 weeks to not disrupt that and tolerate that discomfort. Does that answer the question? I don't know.
Yeah.
Part 2 of it.
Yeah, I think I love the idea of like growing in your ability to tolerate discomfort a bit because, I've sort of found in my work with people, I mean, everyone kind of responds differently. Some people add like foods in, especially if they're in a deficit. Like let's say they're in an 800 calorie deficit or something. Mm-hmm. Like that's a pretty big deficit we're trying to fill. So maybe we like break it up into 2 chunks. Like we get you up 400 and then we get you up a little bit to the 800 or something. So sometimes I break it down in that way. If they're having a lot of GI distress, we kind of break it off into chunks. But I think like a lot of people have symptoms when they're doing that. So, or just kind of like you said, a soreness. Like it's like, oh, your body's not used to having this much fuel, but it takes increasing your fuel and getting over that hump in order for your body to like digest well again. So it's this really tricky period that I have found working with people where, because a lot of people are so magnified of their GI symptoms in this space, it's one of the areas that I find that maybe they increase their calories for a little bit and they're like, oh no, like I'm getting GI distress. I don't like this. Like, I don't think I can go up. And I'm like, no, you can. Like, maybe like you said, we could maybe work around some symptom management tools, which there are. But I think the idea that you're going to manage every symptom through that process is probably an unrealistic mindset to have.
Yeah.
There's probably, again, going to be some transition. If there's not, that's great. But for most people, like, there's going to be some turbulence in there if you've been in a pretty malnourished state and you're sort of refueling again. So I'm really glad you touched on that, because I think that that's a really big area. Do you typically see, like, on the back end, like, GI symptoms decreasing a lot?
Yeah, I would say for the majority of folks that if we get to a place where nutrition looks more appropriate and we are consistently engaging in appropriate nutrition, that there's a big decrease in those GI symptoms. And I think, like you're saying, I feel like a lot of times we're calling on other examples in life where we had to really create a new rhythm and there was like a lot of efforting to do that. And then we are like, oh, now, I got a new job. I'm driving a new wig to work. I had to like pull up the directions every time. And then, by the third week, I'm getting distracted looking out the window. And before I know it, I'm there and I didn't even think about it. Right. I think that's how it feels for a lot of folks of like, it's so consuming for the first, for the first 3 weeks I'm doing it, every GI symptom and experience I'm having is so consuming, not only because it's uncomfortable in the moment, but because I'm dreading what it's going to feel like in the next moment as well. If we can stay consistent with it until we sort of wake up 3 weeks in the future and we're like, oh, I'm looking at my day and I didn't think at all today about did I poop or not, or how comfortable or uncomfortable was I. And I think if we can build a relationship with clients where they can trust that and they can trust themselves to like see through that, then I think that goes well for a lot of folks. But yeah, it's understandably hard and scary to like take that leap and be consistent with it. And it is unfortunate that it takes that consistency. So like that's another message that we're, it can be great. We can do it for a week, but then if we don't do it for a week, we're like starting over, right? So how can we build? That's okay. We have to start over. We're here and we're going to start over, right? But how can we build upon that to make sure we're not having these big gaps where we get thrown off?
And I'm glad you brought up the idea of people learning how to trust themselves again and trust their body, because that's another problem I see with people who have been to integrative functional naturopathic type practitioners, is that there's this really big theme in that space of, well, you need our fancy tests. You don't know what's going on with your body. You don't understand your body on your own. Like, you need the GI maps and the SIBO tests and the Candida test and the blood work and the fancy schmancy allergy tests and whatever. And they even have this slogan of test, don't guess. And we have a whole episode about debunking that idea, but I think that that's a part of the problem for some of the people that we work with, is that they've literally been brainwashed into not trusting themselves and not trusting their body and their experience and their symptoms. And then you lace it in with messaging of, if you eat even a morsel of carbohydrate, you're feeding the Candida. If you eat even a morsel of gluten, you're going to cause leaky gut. If you eat even a morsel of fiber or high FODMAP food, you're feeding the SIBO. You're doing this to yourself, you damn slob. And so those two worlds collide and make for a really difficult situation as it pertains to like IBS, SIBO, tummy problem kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of energy is spent, I think, trying to challenge the like $1 billion diet industry that gives a like more is more message, and like trying to help clients understand that like we can start with like small things. We can always get more intense if we need to be. But once we're in that intense space, it's really hard to be flexible. And so like, what if we just tried to take a slower approach and an embodied approach? I mean, I'm sure you guys encounter with your clients, it comes up a lot in the conversation about even just hunger and fullness cues. There's a lot of education around, well, your body stopped sending you hunger cues when you were malnourished as sort of a way to protect you, right? It said, okay, Amy's not going to be able to get me what I need, so I'm not just going to pester her constantly, right? She must not be able to get it, so I'm just going to stop sending
I'm just going to give up.
Yeah. And then when we've heard of intuitive eating and we've heard of some of these other things, but we've cherry-picked information, we're like, well, I'm not hungry. I eat when I'm hungry and I stop when I'm full, right? But there's more nuance there, right? Our body has stopped sending those hunger cues as an adaptive way to sort of try and keep us safe because food's not available. So if we can communicate to the body some safety, if we can communicate like, nope, food is available and I'm going to get it to you, then we can start to see those like, hunger and fullness cues come back online, and then it can make the process a little bit easier. It's slow. That work is slow. And trusting that messaging is, everything is pretty disembodied about the way that we kind of go about the world these days. So it's like a practice, and a skill, like everything else. And yeah.
I think good way to describe it. And Amy, a lot of this is conjuring up memories of our discussions around OCD and health anxiety. And a lot of it feels very reminiscent of exposure therapy. Mm-hmm. And this idea of like, I think we brought up this one example numerous times on this podcast, just because it was such, I think that we can paint a really good picture with it. But in one of our episodes about OCD, Amy shared a case study from, I believe it was another podcast, of a woman who had harm-related OCD. And her thing was she was convinced that she was going to stab her grandma. No rhyme or reason, no rationale. She loves her grandma very much. She's never stabbed anybody in her entire life. Like, there's no reason why she would do that, but that was her thing that she had convinced herself of. And she had gotten to a point where she could no longer be in a room with her grandma. She couldn't be in a room with a butter knife, let alone a kitchen knife. And she was just avoiding both of those things very strictly, and she was terrified. And obviously, like, you can show that person that they are capable of not stabbing their grandma if you put them in a room with a whole bunch of knives and their grandma and like lock them in the room and leave. And they will eventually prove to themselves that they're not going to stab grandma. But that's not very compassionate. That's not a nice way to treat a human being who's legitimately terrified. So maybe you start the exposure therapy with little tiny baby steps, and maybe you just start by showing a picture of a knife on the computer screen, or a picture of Nana on the computer screen. And maybe that's the first step. And then maybe you reintroduce some plastic butter knives into the house. Yeah. And then metal butter knives, and then eventually like a paring knife. And then eventually you're going to get to that stage, theoretically, in this absurd example. Maybe the end goal is to sit their ass down in a room full of like, not just kitchen knives, but like katana, like samurai swords and grandma, and throw grandpa in the mix too. Why the hell not, And maybe that's like the ultimate exposure, but it took like 100 steps to get that person there, because again, like, you need to have compassion for where they're at. And I feel like similarly, and maybe you could weigh in on this, like maybe to talk about your profession a little bit. I've thrown shade at functional medicine now several times. So it's your turn. But I feel like one of the things that people have expressed to me is that they're reluctant to work with an eating disorder specialized dietitian because they've tried it in the past, and the whole message is just eat a lot more. Just eat ice cream and lard and peanut butter, and it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter if it's healthy. Just, we need to pump you with calories. That is all that matters. And it's like 0 to 60 in half a second, and it's way too overwhelming for them. Do you see that happen in the disordered eating? Because honestly, I have not asked somebody in your profession this question. I don't know if that feedback is purely like the patient's warped perception of the experience, or if that really happens in your world. But would you agree that there is some rationale to going at a pace that causes some discomfort and understanding that that's part of the process, but also not so fast that the person is going to be terrified and miserable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I see this happen most often, in higher levels of care. And I think where it happens the most often there, I think, unfortunately, because of the setup of higher level of care, right? Like insurance is saying I only have someone for 6 weeks. And if I only have someone for 6 weeks, I'm trying to like not only introduce what an exposure is, but I'm also giving you some practice in it. I'm also trying to like get some traction. And I think unfortunately, and then there's a group of 10 people. And so I'm trying to personalize it to you, but I'm also trying to like have everyone get an appropriate level of a challenge. And that's just logistically hard. And so I think a lot of clients who have been to higher levels of care and then are in outpatient doing work are like, exposures, no way, because they have been, I think, in a more like rigid setting, that it stinks. And I think hopefully higher levels of care are getting better and learning about how to like manage the logistical system of that with also what we know to be like helpful clinically and compassionate. And so I think a lot of clients are really valid when they're like, we went 0 to 60 and that was not it, go ahead.
I was going to say, and maybe it's good to differentiate, like just because it was like that in an inpatient eating disorder clinic,
mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily going to be like that when you're working with somebody outpatient and going at a more reasonable pace, right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of folks with ARFID, which for those who don't know who are listening is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And that's an eating disorder that usually doesn't have a body image component, but does have a malnutrition component, where we say someone maybe has some sensory concerns, maybe someone had a traumatic experience with like vomiting, something that really made it a strong list of safe and unsafe foods. And so we do a lot of exposure work with those clients. And like in the example you're giving, if the exposure is the end goal is to be able to just eat fruit whenever we want to eat fruit, great. How it often starts is, can you eat your snack if grapes are even in the room with you at the time? Your snack is a safe food. It's not including grapes, but grapes are on a table at the opposite end of the room, right? Can you even do that? Can you tolerate the smell of berries if they are being washed and sitting next to you while you eat your snack, right? And so we're starting with some of these. Usually I have clients, scale of 1 to 10, you're identifying 10 is the most distressing, 1 is the least. We're trying to get a 6. We're trying to be a little more than neutral, but also not have you flip the table and run out of the room screaming. And so we're working with people, a lot of work up front to say, what all are our long-term goals? And then what are the ways that we can slowly work into that feels tolerable to you, that gives you the practice of tolerating your distress and discomfort, but in a way that we can practice regulating, and build up to that over time.
And sort of flex the regulating muscle, so to speak.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about like sort of the baby steps, because I think this is a conversation I'll have with my patients that have food fears, is like, this is going to take time. Like you said, it's a practice. I mean, as someone that, again, had my own food fears and disordered eating patterns, I would say like I made so much progress when I kind of changed my mindset and started adding stuff back in for like the first 6 months. I feel like I got like 80% there.
Mm-hmm.
The last 20% like would come up randomly. Like they come up less and less, but there'd still be moments where I'm like, oh, I'm doing something that I haven't done in a while. Oh, and some food fears coming up. Like I'd kind of find myself in different situations beyond my normal, like everyday life that might push me a little bit further. So I always tell people, like, for me, it probably took a good like 2 years to really feel like I totally unpacked my food fears and disordered eating. And granted, there could still be some random stuff that come up like every now and then. I just don't sort of like entertain it maybe, or I just feel like I'm sort of through the gist of it. There could be stuff that comes up, but the majority of my food fear journey, I feel like it was like first 6 months, made a lot of progress, but there's like another lingering like year and a half period where like random stuff would come up and I just kind of had to work through it. So I always tell people too, like this isn't a light switch. Like we're not just going to go from like being very scared to not scared like overnight. I wish there was a solution that was like that. So I think just I just wanted to kind of emphasize basically the point you're making too. It's like, oh, this is going to take some time to work through. It's not going to be this overnight thing, and that's okay. I think you can, like, fears are going to come up, and the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot about like expansions and contractions are normal when we're doing something new. And we're going to have these really expansive moments where we were able to try a new food. We were able to go out with friends. We're able to do, and then we're going to have the contracting moment that says like, oh, nope, that felt too scary, or I'm not sure if I can do that. And the contractions don't negate the expansions, right? We expect to be in this really like roller coaster experience, and that hopefully what's happening is, not that we're not having the expansions and contractions, but that they're going from being like, I'm expanding, I'm contracting, I'm expanding, to like, we're getting a little closer each time, right? So we're not having such of a big experience each time we are going in and out from them.
Yeah. And I would say too, I know we're getting closer to time. I think maybe to close too, or to wrap up, like, what would you say to someone who feels like they might be struggling with some food fears or disordered eating? Like, what do you think the first like steps would be? I know we've given some like good tips and things throughout this podcast episode, but I don't know if there's like sort of, if you feel like this really resonates with you, what would the next steps be?
Yeah. I usually ask for people to just be curious, like how much of their like mental energy is spent thinking about food. If 70% of your mental energy is spent thinking about what am I going to eat? What happens if I eat this? What am I going to do next? If it's really dominating your mental and emotional space, that could be an indicator that you need some support. And then if people are feeling like brave enough or vulnerable enough, I think sometimes that they can seek the feedback of a trusted person around them, saying like, I'm noticing this coming up for me. I'm really in it, so I'm having a hard time knowing like, how rigid does this feel? Like, could you give me feedback? That's risky, right? Because I think disordered eating is so normalized and people want the people around them to feel comfortable. But I think if it's someone clinically you're working with, it can be great to ask them. And then if it's someone you can trust in your life, it can be, I think people who love us and support us can often see things that we're not able to see and notice ourselves.
Yeah, that's I love that idea.
Can I add one also that maybe can even happen without doing those yet? Maybe get off social media. Like, just for like a month, unplug from social media and see what that does for your perception of food and nourishment and your body. And I know it's easier said than done, but I think that would be a worthwhile experiment for most people. And for once, I'm actually not just talking about like the Facebook groups and the Reddit threads. I mean, like, don't open Facebook or Instagram or TikTok at all. Or I would even argue YouTube as well. Like, don't open those apps at all for a month and just see what shifts for you and see what you're receptive to and what comes up for you. Because, I think back when we were younger, we had like Tyra Banks berating girls on America's Next Top Model. And we had, what was her name? Like Jillian Michaels or whatever, like shaming people on The Biggest Loser. And what was it? Jessica Simpson was a size 6 and all of the tabloids were calling her a fat cow or something.
Oh God.
Maybe we don't get that quite as much in like the tabloids and TV, but we sure as hell have it on social media still. you see those TikTokers who get Botox every week and lip fillers, and they spend $800 a week on makeup hauls from Sephora, and they have immaculate clothing and a snatched waist. And you see these girls at the gym with like perfect figures, and you see the health influencer or the Mark Hyman or whoever eating their plate of 100% organic arugula and nothing else. But just kidding, because arugula has oxalates. So no, even arugula is off the table. God damn it. And so I think just cutting down the noise and cutting down what you're receiving in that sense for a month could be tremendous for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're willing to do it.
I'm reading a book right now called The Extinction of Experience. Have you guys heard of it?
Ooh, no, but I like the title.
Yeah, I like the title too.
It's Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World. It's by Christine Rosen, but it's not about nutrition, but it's just talking about how all of the atrophy of our human experiences, because we live in such a virtual world. And I was thinking about that as you're talking about social media. I mean, there's just so much innate wisdom our body has and holds that is so like blunted and skewed. Even the moment we pick up our phone, right? Even if it's a work email, if it's an Instagram post, if it's whatever it is. And so I love that. I saw this girl the other day say she was going to implement GGO, which was girl go outside. Whenever she starts to like question what's going on, she's like, I need to GGO. And I think we could all GGO a little bit.
I like that.
I like that too. That's awesome.
I think that is the perfect grand finale for this episode. Speaking of which, girl, get outside, GGO. That's going to be a new, and it makes me happy too, because ironically, one of my favorite social media people to follow is Good Boy Ollie.
Okay.
If you have not checked out Good Boy Ollie, what are you doing with your life? Get on Instagram right now, or TikTok. I think he's on TikTok too. But Good Boy Ollie. He's the goodest boy. He's a chocolate lab, and he has a baby brother, Good Boy Tato. And those dogs will heal whatever ails you. So if you want to maintain social media to some degree, maybe just unfollow every single account other than Good Boy Ollie and Good Boy Tato. That's all I'll say.
Noted.
But we, in this household, we are mildly obsessed with these two labs, and we abbreviate Good Boy Ollie as GBO. And I'll tell my daughter, or I'll tell my mom, GBO, there's a new GBO video. So GGO reminds me of that, and it makes it extra fun and extra healing, in my opinion.
Cool.
Love it.
Yeah.
I know. I need the GGO more.
Yeah.
I did yesterday. I went foraging. I found I think I told you this last year. I found like 18 Juneberry trees at our local hospital, and nobody knows that they're there. Nobody's picking them. So I'm not even joking. I go to the hospital parking lot with like a bucket around my neck, and I picked Juneberries.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
I was in a funk yesterday, and I was like, you know what? I bet the first of the Juneberries are ripe, and by golly, they were. So I came home triumphantly with, 30-40% of a big bucket full of Juneberries, and started my yearly Juneberry haul in the parking lot like a total weirdo. I'm sure people were looking at me weird. But I felt like a different human being when I came back home. Yeah. So, yeah, I can attest to it. GGO works. Love
All
it.
All right. I guess should I take us out, Nikki?
Take us home, Amy. Take us home.
All right. When I get a little cough, I've been a little snotty, so I'm sorry if I'm a little nasally.
She's the cootie queen.
Yeah, I've been a cootie queen lately. But yes, Kelly, thanks so much for coming on. I think, having this discussion around like disordered eating and eating disorder is really helpful for people to kind of get an understanding of like what it looks like and the spectrum of it. It's not like, it doesn't have to be a full-blown eating disorder for you to take action. And I love that we kind of gave some different tips and, how GI symptoms can be sort of a part of the process, and finding ways to be compassionate to yourself while kind of moving through them can be really important. So I hope everyone sort of gained some nice tips. It was so lovely talking to you. I feel like we could talk to you.
Question. Sorry to interrupt your big role. Is there a way that people can find Kelly or follow if they want to learn more from her, or like where she works? And maybe if people who are local to you guys, maybe somebody's listening in the Cincinnati area, right, Kelly? Like,
yeah. We're in Cincinnati. I work at a practice called Gallia Collaborative. And you can find our website at galliacollaborative.com or on Instagram at Gallia Collaborative.
Yeah.
Consistent.
Love it. Yes. Well, thanks for coming on, Kelly. Again, I feel like we could have talked to you for hours. But this was so great.
Yeah. Thank you guys. This was awesome.
Yeah. Over and out.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.